I'm super excited to be here with some staff from Summit Ministries based in Colorado. They're a global Christian organization that typically have been doing camps localized to their locations in Colorado and a couple other places around the country. But this year, amidst all of the stuff that's been going on with COVID around the globe, I'm super excited that I can have Dustin and Tripp and John from the ministry on to talk about what in the world they have put together for this virtual experience for campers around the country. And I've been blessed to know John for a handful of years. He's one of my best friends. And through the process of them going virtual from physical camps to virtual camps and a virtual experience, John has been really talking about how great this experience has been. And so I've been kind of digging in for more information. And finally, I said, all right, I just got to talk to the people who put this all together, which John was part of that team, but then Tripp and Dustin are really the two that have helped mastermind all of this. So I'm really excited to have you guys part of this conversation. So thank you for being willing to give some of your time. So I would love to just go back to early March, maybe even late February, depending on when you started the conversation around, are we going to be able to have, in-person events this year? And love to just hear from you. How did this all start? And what was the first reaction around what are we going to do? And how did you process from there? I would love to hear that story.
Yeah, I think for all of us, like most of the world, when we began to see that summer might not happen, or at least at that time, a portion of the summer might not, we were like, what? This is what we do. This is what we've been doing for 60 years. That was our initial reaction. But honestly, the team here is so great. We took a step back and said, okay, wait. Look, guys, we've known that we need to get into the virtual space to allow students to experience some of our conferences, some of our worldview apologetics training that has been so effective through the years. We've known we need to get in that space, and so let's do what we ask our students to do. When God gives us limitations, or when we are limited, we know that God is involved. And so limitations are an opportunity for us to be creative. And so how are we going to fulfill our mission as Summit Ministries to engage this rising generation, to embrace a biblical worldview, and to promote truth to this world? Like, how are we going to get that done? Well, now we have these limitations, so let's get creative. And basically, once we saw it through that lens, we just opened the box and said, let's figure this thing out. And it became exciting. Okay, how are we going to get to do this? And Dustin can speak to, because he's definitely a visionary, and he kind of led the charge as far as, okay, we can't think about exactly what we've done the past 60 years. What is it that's important about what we've been doing, and that what's been effective, so that we can really get to the bare bones of what we need to do and how we need to structure this in a virtual setting. So I'll let Dustin run with it from there.
Yeah, no, that's a great overview. It was, I think, late February that the leadership team at Summit, when I think Seattle started kind of blowing up a little bit, like, ooh, we need to start thinking about, and even then I was like, nah, that ain't going to happen. And then it started happening shortly thereafter. And I remember we met, it was, I think 2 weeks before the 17th of March, we started realizing that this may happen. And then our CFO said, hey, about a week out, should we hire a project manager to help us organize, should we do this way? Because we started moving like this is going to happen. And so we hired a project manager, and his first day happened to be the day that we scheduled, what was it, Tripp? It's supposed to be like a 3-hour brainstorming session that turned into about 5 or 6 hours.
It was all day, whatever it was.
Yeah. Straight through lunch. But in that meeting, a lot of it was, we asked the question, what is the most important thing that if we don't accomplish this in our conference, we will have missed it? And really it was, as Tripp said, our mission and in our DNA at Summit is truth in relationships, balancing both of those things together. So those have to be central. And then we started saying, and then we started kind of, as we came up with ideas, like, this cannot be like our summer conference. And we can't think of it that way. It has to be something unique. And so with that, so we started not even thinking like, oh, we need to repeat and rinse what we've done in the summer. Like, no, this has to be something unique and different, yet still accomplish our goal. Yeah. And in many ways it came with concessions that we would never concede in our 2-week conference. One of them is like, we are very encourage the students to be low tech during our 2-week conference. Yet if we're going virtual, that became an encouragement because that wasn't a primary thing about what we were trying to accomplish. And so we started conceding things that were not central to our mission and our vision. And so from there, I mean, we came up with over 200 different ideas. Every idea was on the table. There was nothing that we said no to. And kind of collected all of those and then organized them as like, this is a faculty, creative idea. This is a activities creative idea. This is a staffing creative idea, and so on and so forth, to where we ballooned it up and we rested for about a week after that. No. And then we started hitting the ground after that as far as Tripp and the project manager started really, okay, let's get a core schedule down on what this can be. And then and we started going and working off of that from there. But one thing I would say that was critical for the team is that there had to be a lot of trust for people to voice their ideas and opinions. And we had to do this so fast that trust wasn't there between, each other. I think it would have fell flat, that people would not have pushed back on ideas or come up with things that were so out there but they were able to be free to think and come up with this stuff.
Yeah, if I can dive in on that, the statement you said was, we didn't just want to rinse and repeat. And so I'm curious, that I feel like in the event world, that's what's going on right now. Everybody's so used to having done, this is what we do, now we can't do it. How did you guys structure your brainstorm? Is there maybe a short 30-second example you can give, or maybe a resource that you use that helped you guys brainstorm for a bunch of time to give a bunch of categories of what, hey, we usually do this and we tell them no tech, but we're happy to go with high tech because it's going to be a tech conference. So is there an example or a way of thinking through that you could provide to somebody outside your organization?
Yeah, we kind of, it was so long ago and so much has transpired in that time.
Yeah.
But a lot of it was, we put things in categories as far as we have a faculty or teachers that are a part of our conference. We have staff that are a part of our conference. We have, the relationships between students. So we kind of categorize key elements. And then from there, we kind of, as funny as it sounds, forced people to come up, with at least 10 ideas for each category. Because the easy ones will be readily accessible, that everybody will think of. But when you start getting into 8, 9, and 10, that's when the ideas get really weird. And, but also in that really weird, it becomes unique. And in that unique, it's no longer what we've been doing for 60 years. It's something new. And we knew we couldn't go back to the way we were doing things. And so it was the categories of the key elements. And then from there, tons of ideas. Tripp, do you remember other things?
It was one of those things like, I don't know if I can think of 10 ideas. And it was more, just pretend like you can think of 10 ideas and put them down. And
what we ended up finding happening as well, I'm an idea guy, so I love like this sort of a thing. And so what happened was Tripp would go through his 10 and all of a sudden like, oh, that triggered 4 or 5 different ideas for me and for other people as well. And so what went from 10 to people then having, 15 or 20 or whatever, because it fostered more ideation.
Beautiful.
I think it's important to point out there too, with all of those ideas, they were driven by the central question that Dustin alluded to earlier, is how do we fulfill our mission through this program, given the constraints that we have to deal with, and given the opportunity that we are able to work under due to the coronavirus pandemic. So in that process, asking those questions and answering with that set of ideas gave a different set of outcomes through those strategies. And then we're looking at a list of 200 potential ways to do it, which can then be combined in a myriad different ways that have maybe never been thought of before, or that we've never thought of before.
Well, And with that, one of the other things I think, John, as you were talking about, we are so good in the in-person conference space. Like, we know what we're doing. We've been doing it for decades. We have no knowledge here, but I think not being in that space allowed us to think outside of the boundaries. Because if you asked us to do an in-person conference, we would just do what we know what to do and not really think outside of that. But because we had no history here, it allowed us to say, well, we don't know what the technology is, so we're just going to come up with the best ideas and force the technology to fit it, so to speak. Like, so we weren't bound by any past, cultural history or institutional, memories. Like, we had nothing. And so that gave us freedom to think way outside of what anybody's been doing in the virtual conference space. Is that helpful?
And as John started talking through what you guys were doing, I've just mentally noted it for several months here, just kind of asking, kind of following up. I'm sure John's been irritated with me, like, hey, so how's it going? How's it going? Right? Because again, I think what you're talking about, and I think when it comes to the virtual, like the technology side, both AV and IT wise, I'm sure, I don't know if this is the story or not, but most people are like, okay, let's go jump into, GoToMeeting or Zoom in some way, shape, or form, and let's have a meeting. Is that what happened with you guys as well?
That's how it started, I guess. So the thing is, we have basically the Wizard of Oz works for us. Our IT guy is.
Careful! Don't tell the rest of the world who he is, because they might try to steal him. So careful.
That's, man. When we started this conversation and we had ideas, he said, "Wait. You guys come up with the ideas, and I'll figure out how to make it work." And he really is that good.
Wow.
Now, in combination with him, we do have an AV crew. Because during our summer sessions, they're putting together session videos. And so we typically have video interns, and the guy that oversees them is just a master at putting videos together and has worked in that world enough that, as we got the ideas going, he was working on, okay, what does a studio look like for this? And the fact that we had the equipment that we needed is we couldn't see this coming.
Yeah, puts you leaps and bounds ahead of everybody else.
Right. And so we were fortunate just because of what we've been doing with our summer conferences, that we had that ability. So we have a studio with good quality 3 angles of cameras, and even the space for the classroom, and an AV booth, and just the ability to do that allowed us to really be creative, because we had those 2 crews, an IT crew and an AV crew that was just already there.
Well, and even before that, we did our first kind of run through as a half day morning on Zoom, and all of us just kind of said, that sucked. Like, we can't do that. I mean, it was, we've got to think
honest
about
honest feedback is what you're saying. Honest feedback.
Yeah. I mean, all of us were like, oh, that was horrible. And so we're like, okay, we've got to do something else, because this will not sell. This will not excite students. This will not be anything worth doing.
And can I interrupt real quick? Was it, because I know everyone's virtual right now, like most offices. So was it you guys running the conference and then you attending as if you were a student trying to experience it? Or did you actually put students in front of it to see how it was? No. Okay. So it was a demo run through, basically.
It was a demo. And around that same time, what we did, this was a quick turnaround. We let people know we were launching a virtual, which was incredibly difficult to market because we didn't even know what we were doing. And as we kind of came up like, oh, we can do this, we would add something to the marketing page, like, oh, and we're going to do this and this. But it was vague, but there was interest, and we had about 600 people who had signed up, students, parents, just to hear more. And what we did on a Thursday, it's like, why don't we survey them and figure out because we don't know, we're not the customer. So, should we do 2 weeks? Should we do 3 days? Should we do 5 days? What's the price point? What kind of content? How would you like this? Would you like this idea? And we just kind of asked the consumer what they would want out of this, and got just incredible feedback on price points, on duration, on important content that they want to hear, and all sorts of things like that. So that was helpful. And that was right around the time we realized Zoom was not going to play for what we were looking for. I mean, and we did the different, like each one of, Tripp did a great job of, this dry run where, we had one faculty member that would do it this way, and then we did another way. And we did like 5 different variations of how you can use Zoom and interact with students with webinar feature, all of that stuff. And at the end of it, we're like, none of this is good.
That was the start of the process too, Russ. The dry run that they're mentioning was one of 3 or 4 before we actually launched the product. And in the back of our minds, as we're going through this process, everything is filtered through the lens of, how is this better than a student sitting at home
yes.
on YouTube? It has to be better than that. Otherwise, you can't charge. You can't invite them to be part of the relationships that are available here. And, we're not fulfilling our mission at that point either.
Yeah. In fact, the 2 things that we were working against at this point is that students were transitioning over to a virtual, school educational environment.
Mm-hmm.
And they were having a hard time because it's boring. So we knew we couldn't do that. We also knew, in order to be a relational conference, like John said, we can't do YouTube. If you're just delivering content, then go find it on YouTube. You don't have to come to a conference for that. We know that we needed something more. And for me, I think the hinge pin that changed our perspective, even as we began the first couple of dry runs, is we said, wait, this doesn't need to be, we don't need to think about this just as a conference content delivery. This needs to be a production, something that we can use to engage the students where they are. What if we thought about this more like late night, more like, where the audience is engaged with what's going on, where there's interviews, there can be content, there has to be content delivery in what we're doing, but let's bring that idea into the picture. And that really changed how we went about it. So we said, we have to have really good quality video. And so Zoom just isn't going to be able to cut it. Speakers can't even, show good quality video clips to be able to, invoke a discussion through Zoom. We need something else. And so we ended up using a streaming service. And then, some of the chat features we liked, some we didn't. So our IT guys got on, okay, well, what could that look like? And they found another, provider that had more of the elements that we need, that we could do polls. And so the interactive aspects where students could chat with each other, where they could submit questions to the speakers and upvote them, where they could give a thumbs up, emojis, reaction sorts of things, where we could give them a schedule. So it's all in one package. So our IT guy ended up just piecemealing the best of all these different worlds, including some of our own things, onto our webpage, so that it's all in one package. Students can have their one login, and it's all right there. And then, I can talk more about the whole late night thing if you want to, but that was kind of the hinge pin for us, changing on how we did it to engage the students where they are.
I do want to chat about that just a second, but just real quick, just from a data perspective. So from a user experience, people are going to your website, they're logging in with their username and password that they've been given access to, and they experience it through a web browser, is what you're saying, rather than the Zoom app or a GoToMeeting app or anything along those lines. So that means from a web perspective, your IT team was able to layer things on top of each other from a video feed and chat features. And so they have 3 or 4 modules basically on a web page that all are live at the same time, including video, but all these other pieces. Is that right?
Yes, exactly.
Okay, perfect. So let's just say you're talking to an organization that's got an executive director and like 4 staff people. They run a handful of conferences. How should they think through, like, you obviously have a dedicated IT person who can go to Google and do a bunch of research and figure this all out. I'm curious if there are resources that, and maybe that's something we can follow up with, but what should they look for? What should they stay away from? I guess I'm just trying, because assume someone walks in the door like you, they don't understand the virtual world. But I have clients right now that literally the extremes are, just so you know, in case you haven't heard, that they're being sold, hey, you can do a day conference and you can use our service and it'll be $1,000. And I have another client that they got charged $27,000 to use a streaming service for one day. And so there's this extreme of, and they don't know. So like, oh, great, it's only 15 grand. It's not 27 grand. Fantastic, I'll use you guys. But they don't understand the thought process. So I'm curious, can you speak to that maybe a little bit, or is that maybe a follow-up conversation with your IT person? I don't know if that's something you can talk about, but. just thought I'd at least ask from that perspective.
Yeah, I think that's probably a follow-up conversation with the wizard.
Fair enough.
As far as, he did the research of figuring out what's along with our AV guru.
Sure. Yeah.
What kind of quality do we need in a streaming service that's better than Zoom?
Beautiful.
What kind of service do we need for remote speakers to call in? And they found an incredible service that's, very dependable. And yeah, they're not, but they also know what price to expect. They know when they're getting gypped. I would have no idea. So looking back, I don't know how I would do it. And that's why we're in a position at this point to kind of help some other organizations, because we have so many teams. And
you guys are
fortunate.
You guys are programmed, so you're developing a program. Typically it's live. Now it happens to be virtual, but you have the IT support or the knowledge around that. And most organizations don't have that, you guys. And so there's definitely value there. So something more, we can go mine that later, but I would love to hear more about the late night. Like, what were you watching Fallon online or something like that on YouTube? And you're like, we should do this. And how did it come about that way?
Basically, when we
was it Rob that came up with the TV show kind of ideation?
Yeah. I think it was when he started saying this is more of a production kind of thing, and then there was an argument about but we're not after edutainment. Like we're not seeking to entertain. But then we started thinking about it. However, we are after engagement, and how do we use the virtual world to bring students into relationships? And so, and like I said, that was the hinge pin though. So no, we're not going after entertainment. However, some of the things that you get by being live, the interaction that you can have with the people on the stage, it's you can't really describe it exactly, but you lose it in the virtual space just by being in the same room. You catch expressions from the audience, you get snickers over here, you get it, just all those tangible things that are missed. And so we started thinking, so what do we need to do on purpose to close those gaps? And so one of the first things we really thought of is we need to create a relational hub in which we can invite the students in. And so with that right there, we said, okay, that means how do we create existing relationship already? Well, that comes with the hosts. We need multiple hosts that can have some dynamic amongst them that are friends already. So when the students log in, it's basically like the hosts are saying, hey, now you're our friend. Let me introduce you to our other friends, the other students. And when the faculty members show up, let me introduce you to my friend, John Stonestreet, or, Sean McDowell. And so they have this connection through us. We become the mediator. I was one of the hosts. And then I had two more student type individuals that had just, engaging personalities. And there was I would say a variety of personalities amongst us. So we were thinking, okay, so students can identify maybe with one of us more than the other. So that was one aspect of the relational hub that just started off right away. The other side of the relational hub that we already kind of had in place from our live sessions is small group leaders. The small group leaders are those who help, every night, basically, small groups to get together, and they're pouring into their personal lives, helping the students connect the content to real world, emotional stuff that the students are going through, intellectual stuff, just tying it all together. So that's the other end of our relational hub. One of the things that we did, for example, is the small group leaders, they called the students before the session ever began. So there's already that relational connection that's there. So creating this relational hub was huge, and it tied into the late night, the engagement sort of factor.
And a lot of those things, really formed slowly as we kept leaning into this, doing other dry runs and realizing
yes.
We need another host, or and so it wasn't just like, we came up with this. It was walking through it and realizing, and messy and clay-footed as those were, but realizing and growing through those, like, we need to have this. And so it wasn't like we came up with this relational ideation in March. It was walking through these things and continuing to do it better each and every time.
I just got chills, Tripp, just so you know, as you walked through that, just so you know, that ideation is what is missing from virtually every online networking event going on right now, or networking a conference, whatever you want to call it. And the two things that I'll just point out in case you haven't thought through it, but what you've done is you took natural networkers, people that were naturally engaged. I'm curious how you had them introduce each other to friends, because like from a chat perspective, I don't know if it was text or if it was like verbal and through video. But the natural networkers naturally work a room, right? When you walk into an event, there are going to be a handful of people that naturally work a room and introduce people. I'm one of those as a photographer. That's how I operate. But then you've also taken, in your case, small group leaders, but really a mentor type relationship that are helping apply what's learned into real life. And you combine those two, and you were able to create this social relational hub, which is what's missing. So that's just amazing to you guys. So did you guys have the natural networkers? Were they just typing via chat and saying, "Hey, Bob, meet Tim," or "Sally, meet Sue"? Like, how was it done? I'm curious how that happened.
Yeah. So the small group leaders were kind of doing that naturally, because they're actually calling before everything starts, or some of them actually texted, and anyway, they exchanged information. So those natural networkers, I like that term. I'll probably start using it now. But they were already kind of connecting their small groups together before the session ever started. So then when students are chatting, hey, that guy's in my small group. And then in the room, the hosts are doing that just more through the screen. Because we already had a relationship going on. In fact, we learned that if we create a little bit of drama or a storyline through the week, it invited them to participate in our lives even more. And so for what we did this year anyway, is I was the host. My two co-hosts were kind of trying out for the week. And so that allowed the students to get involved, who did they want to keep, and who are their favorites, and all that kind of stuff. A lot of this, the description that I'm giving to it is honestly, like Dustin alluded to, this is in retrospect. I'm seeing what we did that worked. It's not like we came up with all of this other than this idea of, more of a production and inviting the students in, and then it developed over time. So I can look back and see and say, here are the things that work. This is how we created that relational hub in a way that materialized and did way better than we ever expected it would, honestly. I mean, the feedback was stellar. It's like, oh, wow, this is actually working. Good.
There are a couple things too. I mean, being incredibly intentional, like Tripp was talking about with the personal relationships between one another. But one of the other things that, is more passive, and this I'm sure came out of the list of 200 ideas, was something as simple as keeping a list of locations, area, state, and city locations for all the participants. So those who are being part of the program can say, oh, look, there's someone else from my area of my state that's part of this program. Out of a list of 200 participants, you might find 4 or 5 that are in your area of the state, and you find something in common with someone else that's there that you never would have expected, and you never would have found them in a traditional online forum had we not done that as part of the platform.
Yeah, that's good. That was built into
it's a beautiful idea from travel. Like if you travel to, say you go to Australia, and all of a sudden you're on a bus or a tram or something, you hear an American accent, immediately you want to connect with that person because it sounds different and it relates to you. And even if I'm from Michigan, even if they're from California, you still relate because you're both experiencing something similar. So I love that idea of what you pointed out, John. And it goes back to relationships really being the key. I mean, from understanding Summit for the last handful of years, I know it's all relationally driven, like you said, with your small group leaders and with faculty, and then and also staff. John mentioned he called it reality bending. I'm curious how you guys bent reality, and if you can give some examples around what you did over the course of the, your 5-day virtual summit?
Early on in kind of the brainstorming, kind of going back there, a lot of this was, what are some of the ideas? And we slowly started realizing that we needed some kind of physical touch points with the students. And Tripp has a great phrase that he kind of, whittled it down to just bridging the reality gap. To where we came up with just really fascinating ideas, to where early on in the process, we're like, well, let's send them a package. And I'll let Tripp talk about, the nature and the purpose of a package, but let's bring them something physical that they can involve themselves with. But then just also, what are other touch points? And that's where, the engagement that Tripp was talking about with, say the chat feature. He'll ask a question like, where are you guys going in the fall? Like, oh, Russ is going to the University of Michigan. Hopefully you're University of Michigan. Sorry, he's going to Michigan State. There we go. I knew it was one of the two.
Russ went to both of them.
I actually went to both.
Okay.
It's all good.
Okay.
Different times.
The wild card was Western Michigan. So, but like, oh, you're going to Michigan State. Like, but that in saying like, oh, Russ is going here, that reality gap is now bridged because you've made a personal point. And even the video that we have in the classroom, when you're teaching, you're looking straight into the camera and it's only one person on the screen looking right at the student. And again, it's another bridging, and I'll let Tripp go further into it. But that was, I think, we have 3 elements that were critical. The relational hub, the bridge the reality gap was a second. I'll let Tripp, dive into that in more detail. But it was another crucial piece.
The other one was the variety of interactions of how we interact and the faculty interacted. So bridging this reality gap, we want, what's happening in the virtual space to also somehow corroborate with what's happening in their physical space. And so, anytime that we could, every afternoon, in fact, we gave the students assignments to do, where they would do something in their physical space, whether it's serve a neighbor and, get a picture of it or something like that. Or we gave them all kind of assignments. They ranged from silly, just to get some people involved, to the serious, to really reflecting the theme of that particular day. By the way, the package that we sent not only had just lots of snacks and, goodies that we thought they would like, but there was a package within the bigger package for each day. And that physical object related to either the theme or some of the activities that we were going to be giving them that day. So this tangible object, it's the same as what we have on the screen. They have it also. So there's this, bending the reality gap here. We gave them assignments they had to do, and then they could turn those in, whether through photos or videos. And then we would highlight them, some of them, when the next segment began. And so they're seeing themselves or their classmates and cheering them on and that sort of thing. Of course, in the virtual space, it was all of our faculty was live. And so they were interacting with the questions, with the chat, while they're speaking. But it also kind of allowed us to have the students like questioning, wait a minute, was that what you just did? Because the host would just do random things that, to break up the monotony. In fact, we wanted it to be such that the students wanted to be on early because they wanted to see what was going to happen with the hosts. And that we wanted them to stay on till the very end, because who knows what they're going to do next. Or, they're going to introduce some random, we did man on the street interviews. I want to see what the people in downtown Manitou have to say about this kind of thing. But we kept them questioning, is this happening live, or was this the pre-recorded segment that they stuck in? So all these different varieties, that actually allowed us a lot of creativity in the virtual space that we could have never done. I mean, who else gets to, okay, let's go really quick to Kirk Cameron and let him give you some encouraging words before we go to this break. You can't do that at a live thing, but Kirk was happy to send in a video for us. And we had lots of other, kind of celebrities and stuff that did that for us. So that, I guess, speaks in at least to the bridging this reality gap, virtual space, tangible world. Let's meld it all together.
I love the concept of a package within a package. It's just, I've got clients that are doing packages right now, and lots of snacks and, things to drink. in them, and trying to figure out how to send that around the U.S. Postal Service, which is interesting. But the idea of having tangible things that you can all relate to at the same time while it's going on is fantastic. So that was the second pillar. The third one you said was what of what you were looking for was just the zaniness of the host. Is that right? The big X factor, if you will.
Do you mind? I have one other kind of anecdotal story that I think was really helpful with the reality gap. It was on our last dry run through that I remember Dr. Jeff was giving a talk. I can't remember what it was. And he does a Gandalf impersonation. And in this impersonation, it was fun. He does it and he pretends to be Gandalf. And then we didn't tell him, but we put up a poll. How would you rate Dr. Jeff's Gandalf impersonation to like the 50 people that were helping vet it? And I mean, I remember watching this and him seeing that poll, he gave a gut laugh. Like it was an honest moment. And I just thought, and I laughed out loud watching this. Like it was John's shaking his head because he remembers it. It was a true connecting moment. I said, wow, that was powerful. Mm-hmm. And I remember watching session 1 where the same thing happened. And he laughed about it. I said, no, that was not the same as what. So how can we create as many authentic, emotional moments like that, to where asking Sean McDowell a question like, what's your favorite superhero? And him just laughing, like having a moment. And then he expected it the next time. So he kind of led into it. But then we asked him like, what's his favorite car? And the next, but just these personalized, or, with the hosts, one of the things we had the students do was submit a meme for the day. So based on the previous days, they would create a meme and then we would show it. But one of the rules was, as we were talking about, is like, we're only going to have 2 or 3 people vet these and not show anybody. And so the hosts, when they're seeing it, are having an honest laughter, and even the AV team that's in the background are laughing because they can't keep it in. So, it was this, how many authentic moments can we create instead of trying to be perfect, trying to be honest and engaging in that way. And I think that was a crucial element that we discovered early on.
Yeah, totally. Thank you for bringing that up, because that is large in part relates to this bridging the reality gap, but it also crosses over and is related to the third one that you were just starting to ask about, which is just keeping it exciting, varying the way in which we interact. And so we actually asked the faculty, and this is a typical thing of any sort of conference. You have people delivering content, and at some point when you're just staring at a face on the screen, you're like, yeah. So, and this is where in person,
right? Let's up the energy level.
That first.
Yes. And this is where in person, you can kind of catch the vibes of the room and of the speaker. There's just more engagement that happens just being in the same room. So we wanted to vary the styles of our speakers. We just had a selection of speakers. We only choose the ones that are most engaging to be able to interact over a screen. All right. But secondly, we said, all right, guys or girls, ladies, when you're delivering over a screen your content, we need you to interact with the students at least once every 3 to 5 minutes. Even if it's simply asking them a question that then they're going to chat about. If you're a remote speaker, you may not even be able to see what they're chatting, but they're going to be talking about it. Or we want polls from you beforehand so that you incorporate that into your talk and you can give them feedback so that you're inviting them to interact. And just to be creative as you can, speakers. Every 3 to 5 minutes, do something that engages them. But then we also varied even how they went about presenting. So some of them were live in our classroom, the ones that were, a bit more local. And that way it's just a little more engaging when you have multiple cameras. It feels more engaging. When I talked, I said, we're turning off the Q&A. I just want to interact with you on the chat. So I would ask them a question and, let them chat to it, and I would try to respond, and it's difficult to do, but they loved it. And so we try to do it more and more. Some speakers, we said, all right, give your content, and then we're going to leave time at the end for just Q&A. And one of the hosts is going to step in, whether they were live or whether they were remote. And remember, it's this whole friend sort of thing. Okay, so my friends have some questions for you, my other friend. And so we could just have a conversation there at the end after they delivered their content with, with their polls and interactions. And then some we did just totally interview style. And so this took a little extra work on the front end, me getting with the speakers to say, all right, you're going to deliver your content, but it's going to be through questions. So what are the questions you definitely want to be asked in order to get through your content? But I'm also going to bring in the questions that the students are asking where I think they fit well. And so this played into how we chose our host, because they needed to be very familiar with the content and have the personality that can make those connections. But those went really, really well because the students felt like they were having a conversation. The open Q&A, sometimes we just had a whole segment of Q&A. So my wife and I, for example, did a dating discussion. We said, we don't have any content. You're driving this, students. And so we had, and they loved it because they just got to ask their questions. Mm-hmm. So those, that was like 4 different varieties that if it was just the same thing repetitive, unfortunately, you're just going to lose students at that point. So again, we're not looking for entertaining them, but we do have to reach them where they are. And so we have to engage them with something a little more what they're used to bring them in.
Yeah, I find it interesting with conferences going on right now. It's, typically you got keynote. So the traditional conferences, we got keynote in the morning, keynote at lunch, keynote to close. We got panels in the middle with 3 or 4 people. And most folks are, I've photographed thousands of events, and let's just give everyone an average grade of a B on stage, right? Even if they're part of a panel, I'll be generous and give everybody a B grade. When you're by yourself in the room, automatically you go down to a C+, just because there's no human interaction there. So what ends up happening in the professional world, I think, is that people are sitting there, literally conference in front of them, second screen over here with their email up, and they're literally checking email and doing their work while they're supposedly at a conference. And I find it very interesting that you guys have taken that to the next level and said, we want to make sure that students are engaged and they're with us. They're not with their friends on text message. And just those examples are amazing. And varieties I have yet to see, to be honest. This is me letting you know, like, I've been a part of a lot of virtual events. This is a rare thing to have that much variety going on. So kudos to you guys. Yeah. So I'm curious, results, like from not walking in the door, like we have no clue what we're doing, but we know we can do it, to now I think, how many sessions did you get through? I think you got through 8, is that right? 6.
We did 6, not counting the dry runs that we did.
Right, but 6. So 6 paid sessions. What are the results? How are you guys measuring effectiveness and all that type of stuff? I'd love to hear a little bit about that.
Yeah, Dustin can probably speak to this a little more directly, but even in our live sessions, we do surveys at the beginning and at the end so that we can actually have some measurable data that allows us to improve and get better. So I know, Dustin, I think you've been looking at most of those, and I haven't had time to really look at them except for once you guys go through them and give us feedback.
Yeah, no, it was, so we had 937 students that went through our program this summer. And what we realized was our capacity was about 200 per session because of where we were at with the technology. We were quite literally building the tracks right before the train got there. And so we're just now being able to code everything. We haven't been able to, it's just adjusting on the fly for our IT. So right now our capacity was about 200. And our last session, we had 200. So it didn't kind of go down. It actually, we had 89 in the first one, and it climbed up to 200 in the third, and kind of went down to about 150 and then climbed back up to 200. So the demand was there. Some of the questions we ask, just like, how excited are you to be here? And usually we get a range of 5 to 7. So 6 is generally where students are. And then at the end, we ask, like, what's your overall experience? Like, what were your thoughts? And we were getting 8.5 to the mid 9s in a session. And our net promoter score, if you know anything about a net promoter score, every single session was either 65 or higher, with some sessions pushing 75. And these are students giving us this feedback. And while that's, while they had a good experience, that's not everything. Like, are they actually, because we're truth in relationships, we asked them about small groups. How, 98% either said keep the same amount, or we want more time in small groups and discussion. Like some of the small groups, we give them an hour, but because it's Zoom, they stay on for 3 hours discussing and chatting, interacting. And then some of the other questions we've asked are just our content. Like, before, like, how confident are you in the Christian worldview? And usually maybe like a 3.5, but at the end it's bumps to a 4.2, 4.3 on a scale of 1 to 5. All of our data points of, how confident are you in sharing your faith? All of these things went up by anywhere from 10 to 30%, depending on the question, on a scale of 1 to 5. So, usually from 3 to somewhere in the low 4s was pretty typical for every single session.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, it's the Net Promoter Score was honestly sometimes better than some of our summer in-person conferences.
And I think
it's amazing. So,
and
those are comparable, Dustin. It's over the course of the 60 years history at Summit, we see Net Promoter Scores that rival Apple, Google, Facebook, and to transfer that into the online world, the first year out of the gate was something that we were surprised by, but due to the characteristics that you guys have built into the program, it's something that we're excited to bring into the next year as well.
Hey, one of the stats that I thought was really cool, the fact that the students that logged on day one at the beginning versus the students that were still with us at our little graduation ceremony were statistically the same. Is amazing. We didn't lose people throughout the week. That blew my mind because I know what happens to me at an online conference. so that was really cool. Yeah.
Even just an hour webinar.
Yep.
I mean, you see a dip. Our first session was 89 to 89. Logged in Monday morning, logged in Friday evening. It was 89 of the 89. Some of the other sessions we dipped, I think 80% was the lowest we got as far as retention, meaning we held on to 80% over the course of 5 days, giving 6 hours of content every single day. And these are high school students, and many of them, like, it's amazing.
I would love to have you speak to, just as we wrap up here the last couple minutes, just speak to two groups. One is, if you taking this experience and seeing results, like, 'cause there's lots of ideas in the world, but results talk, right? And you guys are out there doing 937 students through that process over the course. You have, boots on the ground, real world experience, and great results because of it. I'd love you to speak to two groups of people as we kind of close up. One is the K-12 education world that's going on right now. You're obviously dealing with the high school student world, but I'd love you to first speak to educators that are walking into a fall season where they have to manage all of this. They don't have IT. They don't have, they're just a teacher that was teaching 7th grade math, and now they're being pushed into a virtual experience, and their students are being pushed into that world. Can you speak to them as a teacher? Like, what would you say to them based around the success that you have had? And I'd love to hear just maybe a minute or two thoughts from each of you.
Okay, here's the simplistic advice I would give. This is an opportunity to rethink what education even is. Education is not the transfer of information. That's part of it. But this gives us now the opportunity to stop thinking about how we've always done it. Rather, think about, how do I engage these particular students where they are, and be creative. Maybe some of these ideas give you some ideas, but just delivering the content isn't going to do it. How do you get them brought into opening up their minds to see, here's an opportunity I get to learn? I think just having that mentality and then putting it on them. Our teachers in this country have, and Christians especially, you guys can be so creative. Just go back to the drawing board like we did. What is education exactly? And how can I get at these particular students? That's my simple advice.
Beautiful.
Yeah, no, I would echo all of that that Tripp said. Is just to rethink it and not do it in the same way you've always done it. There is an opportunity for ingenuity and all of these things that were not there before because it was always this way. And the other thing that I would add is to continue to learn and to continue to grow and to continue to ask and get feedback, to develop and get better as you're walking through it. Try new things and like, ooh, that worked really well. Why did that work well? Not just like, let's repeat it, but what was it about this that was so good that connected? Okay, this was what was at the heart of it. Now let's try to recreate that in different ways because this worked well instead of just redoing that same idea. And so just be thinking, asking, like early on in the process, I mean, we interviewed so many different faculty members about their virtual experience so we can then help train our faculty. So, and the idea is being a learner as you're the one educating at the same time, being a learner of if you're watching this, you're already doing that. Do so more and more would be probably my two thoughts.
John, how about yourself?
Yeah, one of the most long-standing analogies at Summit Ministries is the idea of a double helix and the DNA nucleotides that twist around one another represent truth and relationship. And when you ask any of the staff members at Summit Ministries, what is your job? Their answer is some version of, my job is to create bonds between truth and relationship for one person every single day. And as Tripp mentioned, education is not simply the transfer of knowledge. It's something that happens within relationship, married with truth. And as we look for those bonds that connect truth and relationship, it's something that we can do personally, but also organizationally. And we're really happy for the opportunity to do that over this summer for 937 students. And it's something that we encourage people to think through, how can I do that in my own sphere of influence in whatever way I'm enabled to do that.
That's great. So the second and closing question, so take it away from a K-12 education perspective and apply what you've learned to, say, someone who's running a small nonprofit association or an organization. They've got a handful of staff people in, call it somewhere in Kentucky or Florida or Texas. And the thing that their organizations are missing most are the relationship portion of it, right? There is content, say they run a day-long conference, and yeah, they've got 2 or 3 speakers, but the real value is the breakfast and the lunch and the networking in the hallway. What would you say to those people that are planning those events right now, and in terms of what you've learned around the relationship side of going virtual?
Yeah. So I think that first of all, figuring out a way to create existing relationships in which you can invite your students or your attendees into, we had great success with. And so figuring out ways to do that. If it's just one person, delivering content, it's just harder to do. So there has to be that extra element, I think, to really engage them relationally. But also as we grow out of grade school and middle school, if you go back to, classical education, you enter the rhetoric stage where students, especially, they need to express themselves. Now we can talk about education, but we're not going to do that. But thinking about how can you allow your students, especially that high school, college age is what I'm thinking of right now, to enter into and express themselves into these relationships. That's going to get them involved. They need to be participants in what's going on. So utilizing simple tools like polls and chats are helpful, but even if you can go further than that, to be creative, something like we did is giving them assignments that they could submit to show off their expertise, to have some sort of relational input into what's going on, can be very, very helpful with what you're trying to do.
Yeah, as you were asking that question, how do you recreate it, or especially those organic moments?
Yeah,
and I think Tripp is right, in his assessment and trying to figure out different ways. I mean, with us, we're like, well, meal times are critical to Summit. That was something that was, you know, borderline a non-negotiable because of the interaction that has. And so, you know, that's where we're like, well, we can't do it exactly the way, but something is better than nothing. And that's where we had, after some of the sessions, we had students, no staff involved, break out into discussion groups. And then they're discussing the content and with one another as they would at a meal table. And then at night times we had, you know, a faculty, we had multiple options that they could choose from with our faculty to have what we call dinner groups. For 45 minutes, that, you know, if students wanted to bring their meals and eat on Zoom and have a conversation with the faculty member, you know, as they're chatting in the chat feature with one another. So just different things like that. Like, these are the things that are critical to our culture. We don't want to lose those. So just being creative, you know, what is it about this and how can we then implement it? Instead of just getting rid of it, just being creative. Because there are ways. And again, something is better than nothing is always kind of my mantra. And let's lean into the something. And we did, and something became something great.
That time over dinner is the time that, you know, those natural networkers, like you were saying, Russ, they do shine. And being able to provide that in an unstructured environment, that was one of the few times where all of the participants were on camera and in an unstructured Zoom room. The rest of the time they were logging into the program, you know, on the portal with all of the, you know, existing features. And that flowed out of, you know, the question that we alluded to earlier. It's like, what do we want to achieve? And how do we do this in a way that beats simply the transfer of information? And some of these ideas and all of these things came out of the history of the organization. So for those people that are thinking through, how can I do this for my organization, you have to ask the questions like, what do I know about the people that I already serve? Summit's been around since the early 1960s. And so, you know, the institutional knowledge that flows into serving 16 to 25-year-olds around the country is what we brought to the table as we built this program. The same is going to be true for whatever organization that you're a part of, and looking into who do I serve, what do I know about them, and how can I foster those connections is the place to start.
Well said, John. And I think with that, we will wrap up the conversation. So Tripp, I appreciate great meeting you. Dustin, great meeting you as well. Keep up the great work. John, thank you for the introduction. We'll make sure to include information about Summit at the end of the video here. So if you guys have questions, you can always reach out to the folks at Summit Ministries and learn about the Christian worldview and this amazing virtual experience that they've brought to the table in the summer of 2020.